But what they didn't know, Peter had been scheming, and this would be the end of their lifelong friendship. The day broke in a town called Desert Valley. The sun was bright, and the fresh smell of spring was in the air. Peter, Joe, and Sam were walking to their fishing spot deep in the mountains. A crater lake lay there. It was their favorite spot, and they had been going since childhood. "How's life for you guys?" Peter spoke up as they trekked the dirt road, each holding their fishing gear in hand. Same old," Joe laughed, and they chuckled to themselves before going silent, having little escape from their harsh reality. The town was falling apart, people were leaving, and it wasn't like it used to be. The local economy was suffering due to a severe drought, and with little work available, they were beginning to worry. "We're here," Sam announced as he walked towards the lake. The lake level was low as it had been drying up, but there was still enough water to fish. The trio began fishing, and soon enough, they had caught a few fish. "Come here, guys," Joe shouted to the other two. They ran to him and saw his latest catch lying on a stretch of ground recently exposed by the receding water. Something shiny lay on the ground next to the fish. "You know what that is?" Joe asked with a sly smile on his face as Sam picked it up. Holding it, he realized, "It's gold," he shouted ecstatically. "For real?" Peter asked. The heaviness of it left no doubt. They each thought of what they could do with this before Peter pocketed it. "Look, there's definitely more, so let's fish in this area and see if we can find more," Peter explained. "No, that's not how it works. We need to get some gold pans and find it in that way," Sam added. They agreed to get the gold tested and invested in some gold mining equipment, just a few pans and various other items. The group left at dawn the next day and spent it panning for gold. As they had thought, they found a few more nuggets. "This is crazy. If we keep up at this pace, we'll be rich. Then maybe this town can be fixed up," Joe laughed. Sam smiled, but Peter was quiet. He had a stern look on his face. "Hey, what's up with Peter?" Joe asked Sam. "No idea. He's probably just lost in thought," Sam replied. They found a lot of gold and went home with hopes for more. The weekend was over, and they had to go back to work, so they each took their findings and said goodbye to each other. But what they didn't know, Peter had been scheming, and this would be the end of their lifelong friendship. The next weekend came, and Sam and Joe couldn't get a hold of Peter. They walked to the lake to see if he was there. As they got closer, they could hear shouting and voices, and to their dismay, the entire lake had been gated off. Peter stood next to the lake. Large machines were everywhere, and the water looked murky. "Peter," Sam yelled, "what's the meaning of this?" Peter turned to them and looked angry. "Make them leave now," Peter shouted, and two armed men walked over. They motioned for Sam and Joe to move off of the property, but Joe stood his ground. "What do you mean we have to leave?" Joe shouted. "Private property," the guard spoke coldly. Joe and Sam backed off, leaving the area. As they walked down the mountain, dozens of thoughts rushed through their minds. But the biggest question, how was Peter able to do this in just 5 days? Meanwhile, Peter was still on the mountain. He was pacing around. His plan had gone perfectly. Sam and Joe could do nothing, and he was making more money than he'd ever made in his life. "Boss, who were those men? They seemed to know you," one of the guards asked curiously. "Nope, never seen them in my life," Peter replied. He turned back to his little operation that he had set up over the last 5 days. He knew that Sam and Joe would be busy at work, so he had gone behind their back and bought the entire plot of ground the lake was on. He had bought it cheap from someone that needed the money, and then quit his job. He hired men to mine the gold, bought machinery. It was all perfect, he thought to himself, but he didn't know it wouldn't last for long. Sam and Joe were really upset at being betrayed by a lifelong friend, but the purchase was legal, and there was nothing they could do. "You know, there's a spot up on the mountain that Peter's never been to," Sam said. "The small lake?" Joe asked. "I totally forgot that it existed," he added. The two had nothing better to do, so they set off to the mountain again, but this time they followed another route. Climbing up the rough and steep mountain was a difficult hike. When they reached the secluded lake, It was full of water, and the greenery had continued to grow. "Why is it so green?" Joe said. "There's a spring that feeds this," Sam said, pointing to the right. The lake was secluded, and they began fishing. They caught a few and started a small fire, cooking the fish. After they ate, and as they were leaving, Joe pulled out his pan. Scooping up a panful of gravel, he panned, and as the contents settled at the bottom, there lay 2 decent-sized nuggets. "Look at this," Joe said, calling Sam over. The two smiled and immediately spent the rest of the day and well into the night panning for gold. Their wives got upset the second they got home, but after hearing the full story, they understood. They had each found a panful of gold. They spent the next few days planning their revenge. They spent night and day panning, and the gold was piling up. They stored it safely in a lockbox, and once they had enough, they bought the land secretly. They didn't spend their money on machines and workers. They did the panning themselves. And as the weeks went by, they had amassed a decent amount of wealth. They decided to check up on Peter to see how he was doing. They walked down the mountain, and they heard nothing. It was quiet as they neared the large lake. It had dried up due to the heavy mining. The machines lay still, and no one was there. The gates were wide open, as if someone had abandoned the place. Joe and Sam looked around and saw Peter digging in the dirt. They watched him from afar, and they left quietly. "He brought it on himself, but it hurts to see him like this," Joe said. Sam agreed, and they decided to go to Peter's house the next day. He was home, and he let them in quietly and apologized. "I'm sorry, guys. Please forgive me. I saw the gold and it went to my head," Peter cried. "The town seized my assets after the lake went dry, and I damaged the water supply. I have nothing, he sobbed. Sam extended a hand outward. Holding Peter up, he said, "It's okay, brother. You don't have to suffer any more. Peter, we can forgive you, but we need to restore the town's water supply," Joe said. Sam and Joe paid Peter's fines in exchange for 2/3 ownership of the large lake. They built a new water system for the town, which did not depend upon the large lake, and donated money to local charities and businesses so the town could be restored. They developed a plan to mine the gold in a sustainable manner. Sam and Joe held Peter responsible for his actions and required him to spend a significant portion of his profit improving the town. Eventually, their friendship healed, and they resumed fishing together.